So we can start the session today. I'm going to make a very short introduction. Then I will leave the floor to Eduardo Russo and Dr. Cifone for the session of this morning. Just to remind that we started the webinar yesterday. We have two sessions dedicated to the physical observable of UAPs, one on optical, the other one on electromagnetic and radar, plus two roundtables, one about the observables and the other one about international matters. So for the second day, we will have today two new sessions, which are more oriented to the interaction of the UAP with the environment, and I will leave Eduardo explain that, and also a session on miscellaneous subjects, including the gravity control, including an analysis of the DRD documents, or some of them related to the propulsion. I remind the DRD documents are these white papers per se, which were issued through the swap program. And we'll have two roundtables. One roundtable moderated by Eduardo Russo about the effects, and with a very good contribution. I'm not going to unveil the participation. We'll see that later. And finally, this afternoon, a roundtable gathering pilots, military pilots, civil pilots, and controller, Mr. Sean Cahill, giving their view, their experience about the UAP encounter. So the session is open. Eduardo, if you want to make comments, introduction, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. As we all know, UFOs, UAPs are mainly a visual phenomenon, but during the decades, we have been collecting several thousands, if not tens of thousands, of reports about the physical interaction of the phenomenon with the environment. And this is very especially interesting, not just in order to confirm the reality of the phenomenon, but as of trying to understand what it is, how it works. What do we mean by interaction effects on the environment? There are several possible effects that have been reported by witnesses or found on the environment. We go from the physical traces, the ground traces, to interaction with the electrical or electronic devices. The classic was the so-called electromagnetic effects, but we don't know if it is electromagnetic, and let's say vehicle interference. But we also have had effects on vegetables, on plants, on animals, and on humans, be they physiological or psychological effects. Some researchers also include in this large category that we usually have been calling close encounters of the second kind, also any non-visual perception. So, especially with close encounters, effectively, when there are smells or sounds, that is other senses than the eyesight. This morning in this session, we will have 4 different papers by 4 different speakers, coping with different sides of this. The session chair is Dr. Mike Cifone from the USA. He is formerly an epistemologist from the New York University, but most important, he is the director of the Society for UAP Studies. As for the papers, we will have a French contributor, Dr. Gerard Labaune, that is a member of Sigma 2 Commission, He comes from the École Polytechnique in France. His specialty electromagnetism and hyperfrequency, and we will talk about a very well-known case of an interference with a military plane in Teheran, in Iran. Another paper will be by Geoffrey Mestchersky, sorry about my pronunciation, another member of Sigma 2 Commission. He comes from the Paris 6 University, is a geochemistry. His specialization in field sampling will be applied to another famous example of sample analysis of a famous case where a physical fragment was recovered from a UFO sighting. The third one will be a joint presentation with two authors, an American one, Larry Hancock, who graduated in the University of New Mexico, has a long experience and career in the United States Air Force and in the intelligence. And he joined Ian Porrit, who comes from down under, from New Zealand, and is a scientific coalition, sorry, for UAP studies member, and they authored an interesting analysis of a wide series of reports involving military installations in the United States of America, with quite a few interferences of different kinds. And last but not least, we will have Anne Tyler, a licensed mental health professional from the USA, who is involved in the psychological and well-being aspect of UFO encounters. She is a member of several organizations, among them, once again, the Society for UAP Studies. But it will be Mike Cifone who will direct all the morning session about physical interactions with the medium by UAP.
Okay, thank you, Eduardo. I propose that we start immediately this session. Maybe Mike Cifone would like to make some remarks just before starting.
Well, I was going to say some things about the talks, but I think Eduardo covered that adequately, so I think we could just begin.
Okay, so let's go. Thank you.
Thanks. So I guess our first talk is Dr. Gerard Labaune.
We'll speak about the Teheran incident and use it to be the basis of a method to determine the electromagnetic radiation of UFOs by a new way. As source, we will use only open literature, no problem of confidentiality, and especially the Cometa report, because in the case of Teheran incident, it's very well documented, I mean, quantitatively, so it's possible to take into account process and distances and events and effects. We have to make some assumptions. First of all, we consider the testimonials to be true. That's not our problem to define if the witnesses are true or not. We suppose to be true. We will only deal with the problem from the engineer point of view. And we will assume that the radio and weapon system failures are due to the electromagnetic radiation from the UFO and its appendage, but only consequences of electromagnetic radiation of the source. The method we propose, measuring electromagnetic radiation from UFOs, is very difficult because of their unexpected appearance. Setting up monitoring networks is always very complicated and very expensive. And the idea we have is to use combat aircraft which are equipped by radars, camera, and electromagnetic sensors to be sensors and in fact threshold sensors of the failures. Moreover, we have the chance in this aircraft to have very good witness. Pilots are very good witness considering dysfunctions and situation. In fact, malfunctions appear in our system. It can be seen as a measure of what happened. We know perfectly well the electromagnetic susceptibility of our systems, so they can be seen as sensor, I mean threshold sensor. The only question is to know if the sources which have radiated the electromagnetic perturbation are or not human-made. So, at a given date, we know the performance of man-made sources, and knowing the distance means you can tell whether the source is potentially human or not, and we'll try to do it very carefully with many margins. The method we propose. Okay, Teheran incident, beautiful case. Cometa reports give a very precise description of the situation. All the problem is contained is this precision, because this distance, especially, are very important to make quantitative the description of the incident. But on the night of September 1819, two F-4 Phantom fighters attempt to intercept a new UFO. This UFO has been seen by witness and by radar, and it's important to notice that radar cross-section is very important, looking like a Boeing 707 cross-section. So a very large carrier. We'll see further that quite important. I note also that the event happened in 1966. The first fighter saw the object, but at 45 kilometers, says the witness, radio failure occurs. The second fighter, also seen the object, suffers the same radio failure in the same at the same distance, and suffers a weapon system failure when it tries to fire a missile. To be the point, we have to separate clearly radio failure and weapon system failure. Technical distinction must be made between radio problems and weapon system problems, because the coupling is not at all of the same nature. Both of the cases provide important information about the source, but we'll see further that the case of weapon system seem to be very more informative than the case of the radio, which much more limited. Concerning the radio failure, radio interference penetrates through antennas that we call, in terms of electromagnetic compatibility, as a coupling front door. It's very simple because components are just after the sensors, and we know so perfectly detection and malfunction levels that they are the same, and they are unchangeable for functional reasons for all reception chain. I give here a picture of this chain of reception containing the antenna, some filters depending on the range of spectral distribution, limiter, low noise amplifier, mixer with some local oscillator, filter of intermediate frequency, and finally amplifier for the intermediate frequency. I give also value of the gain and of the limit breakdown dysfunction for all radio chain. Weapon system failure. Radio interference penetrates through the structure, what we call in electromagnetic compatibility backdoor. That's much more difficult to evaluate because the coupling is in all the cavity and harness internal to the structure, that's quite impossible to calculate it and to fix which is the role of each of the part. So system susceptibility is subject of specification, not on a part, but on the totality. And the concept to define the susceptibility has to make some assumption concerning sources which will attack a system, and that's difficult because you have to take into account what exists right now and what will exist during the life of the system. Nevertheless, at any given time, even if, of course, F4 Phantom is secret for the USA and we have no value, but we have in Europe and especially in France some other systems which are comparable to them, and that's always quite the same because the technology of material, assembling material for the aircraft, and technology to make source which will be the source for the weapon used by the enemy are the same. So we have a good idea of the value retained for F4. So we have now to do a quantification for backdoor coupling. I said it's quite impossible to calculate step by step the penetration and the coupling and the way of perturbation from one point of perturbation to the port of the component. So we define an effective coupling projection as a ratio between system illumination in terms of Poynting vector and disturbance of electronic component in terms of current and voltage. Measurements have been carried out of a wide range of equipment worldwide, especially, of course, USA have made many of them. Many things appear. The results are always the same, about for different countries, but also from 76 and now that's about the same. I give here a picture describing the evolution of this effective coupling cross-section as a function of frequency. We can get the same curve as a function of polarization and the same curve as a function of incidence. It's very clearly about for 40 dB. That is very important. But in our case, that's not a problem because we are looking for a threshold level. So we retain the maximum value, not to be in the doubt considering the value retained. Specific definition, I said previously that is based on the hypothesis of the enemy supposed sources at the date of specification and during the life of the system. But the American, with a very practical approach, they have often have qualified all the sources using what they call a merit factor, that is the product of the power of the source by the square of the frequency. It was surprising when this description appeared, but the experience I've seen that in fact that's very pertinent and quite efficient. The evolution of this merit factor over time is very important. We can see of this graph two family of technology, and the upper part of the graph since the new technology, since the years 80 about, we have to notice that this technology are very, very, very heavy and few possible to implement on aircraft, even in the case of large aircraft like Boeing 707. So, the Teheran scenario, we have to quantify. Donc, we have defined and use a tool, a simple graphic tool to analyze Teheran scenario. Top left, we have a play between the frequency of the radiation and the size of the antenna. Top right, we have a play between the distance between the source and the target and the diameter of the beam, capability to reach target. Right bottom, we have the value of the pointing vector, which is necessary to go to dysfunctionment of the systems, and they are defined by the previous curve of effective coupling cross-section. And all this leads to a minimum, that's the threshold we are searching, minimum value of the merit factor defined previously. So in our case, we have retained the frequency of 10 gigahertz, but frequency quite often used when a directivity have to be obtained with an antenna of a reasonable size. So to have 2 meters value, 2 meters antenna diameter, and we have retained a distance between source and target of about 10 kilometers, because that's not clear in the commentary report to know exactly the distance between the small vehicle coming from UFO. So 10 kilometers seem to be a minimum. And after that, we have to get the fluence power density on the external of the target to create the dysfunctionment of the system. And we have written in our case, using previous curve, the value of 100 watt per square centimeter. All these things are being what they are. We need merit factor of the source at minimum of 1000 gigahertz square. Clearly, you can see on this graph that the state of the art in 1976 is clearly not much with reality, even in the case of a large carrier. In conclusion, performance in 1976 seems out of reach, especially in an airborne version, even in the case where this carrier was large as Boeing 707. So now we are faced to a problem. Situation is perhaps not quite well described by commentary report, or the dysfunctionment are not exactly the dysfunctionment described. So we have a problem, and we are working on other cases to confirm or not the idea. But at the first, right now, it's clear that it seems that in the Teheran incident, the sources are not man-made. That perhaps not very careful what I say, but well, that's thanks for your attention.
Okay, shall we make some comment before starting the other presentation? So I thank warmly Dr. Gerard Labaune for his presentation, which is a little bit technical, but once more, this webinar is also the opportunity for experts to deliver their analysis, exchange views, and so on. And we have a great diversity of expertise part of the webinar. I would like to make a few statements about this presentation. First of all, Gerard Labaune made reference to the Cometa report considering the Teheran case. This case was very well documented in a report on UAP's aeronautics case that was issued by the NARCAP US with a contribution of Richard Haynes and Mr. Dominic Weinstein. First, we analyzed this report, which was making a reference, by the way, to investigations that were conducted at the time of this incident. And I remember that the NARCAP report was making reference to a DIA report about the Teheran incident. We addressed this problem, this issue, in the Sigma 2 report issued in 2021. I strongly advise for those who have not obtained this report to get it, because there are chapters concerning the electromagnetic effects first, and of course the Teheran case is analyzed with contribution from Dr. Labaune and other experts. What's the conclusion? The conclusion is not black and white. However, it is clear that the analysis based on the effects of microwave used possibly as electronic warfare or directed energy weapon could create disturbance of different electronics equipment. For example, at distance of 10 kilometers. By the way, I remember it seems that for the radio jamming and so on, it happened at 40 kilometers. I think that's the figure part of the report made by Dominic Weinstein. And the conclusion is that it would be not possible at that time in 1976 to obtain such effects with the current technologies, airborne technologies that were known. That's the point. And going further, creating disturbance of the armament control of the missiles, because it's not only a problem of dysfunction of the radio, but it is also a problem of dysfunction of the missiles armament electronics. It's clearly something which is very surprising and not matching the known technology for airborne application at that moment. That's the question mark. It's difficult to be completely affirmative because, like Dr. Labaune said, of course, there are uncertainties on the electronics susceptibility and so on. But the math, if you wish, are showing that you need to create the fluence on the electronics at 10 kilometers requires a source of power, very important and beyond what was known as airborne source of power. So, if there are questions, I can try to answer, but I am not an expert like Gerard Labaune. If not, we can continue the session.
Was there any ground effect recorded?
Good question. In fact, we had two phases, if you wish. One phase, which is the interception mission conducted by the 2F4. Okay, so they are targeted to the UFO. The first F4 tried to intercept, and the UFO was not an aircraft. It was a ball of light. okay? And a second ball of light is separating from the main, okay? And flying, if you wish, towards the F4. And at some distance, it seems about 40 kilometers, okay? There is a disruption of the radio, the interphone, and so on. And the pilot tried to engage and fire a missile, and then, you know, it breaks down. So, well, it divert trajectory, and then the electronics recover, you know, all the functions. And that's the first part with the second fighter. I don't remember exactly the details, but it's what is happening. Then there was a third ball of light, which is extracted from the main ball of light and flying down to the ground very quickly. And the pilot thought that it was going to crash, but it didn't. At the last moment, it slowed down, just landed. And what happened afterwards, the civil air traffic was well, disturbed by a cone of jamming at distance more than 40 kilometers in an angular sector. So it was just like, using an image, if like some kind of jammer landed, you know, and created an area of jamming, creating, you know, discrepancies in the operation of navigation device and so on during hours. So that's more or less the summary.
On the technological point of view, how focused can a jamming signal be? Can you have a very tight, focused beam of jamming, or do you need to scramble the whole area?
Well, I'm not an expert, but roughly speaking, it depends on the effect which is searched. If it's what people call, and which is well known, the standoff jamming, you create a sector where you are blinding the radars and so on. So you generate a noise, a big noise, okay, in angular sector, and you try to blind, you know, the radar to saturate them so that they can't detect and so on. In this case, it's maybe the problem generated later on with the navigation system and so on. So a noise created in an area and with an effect in depth. But the first effect which was described for the F4 is another story. It's not a matter of jamming, for example, the radar, the onboard radar of the aircraft. It's like Dr. Labaune described, creating an influence through the antenna and the electronics. That's the front door effect, and possibly going back, you know, the sensor and using some cavities and so on to create a signal or current, you know, going into the electronics and making the electronics break down. Okay, so it's not a jamming, it's a failure of the electronics, a temporary failure created by the effect of the radiation generated on the aircraft, on the sensor.
And can you be as precise as to select which parts of the electronics you can fry, or just depending of the resistivity of the craft?
Well, once more, I'm not expert, so I can't come into details, but clearly you have, for example, an antenna. This antenna on board the aircraft is used to generate this radar search and so on, but at the same time, the antenna is receiving back, okay, the radar beam, okay, it's what it's returning from the target. So of course, this is a receptor, a receiver, you know, which is going to get the radiation coming from the object. Okay, so it's a strength as a sensor. It is a weakness as a receiver if somebody try to jam or create what we call the microwave weapon effect.
Last question. it made me think about the Jersey case with the primary radar that appeared to have scrambled data. Could that be an effect from an anomaly?
Well, I would be very cautious about the Jersey case. I think that what General André tried to point out is that we are doing an exercise which is difficult, which is analyzing all the radar plots without having a very accurate knowledge of the signal processing or the information processing of the ATC system. So the question mark was, for example, why do we see beyond the normal range of the radar a lot of plots? So maybe it's because the system is changing a threshold. Okay, within a range, it's create a high threshold because the objects are closer, and in other case, you can release, and so you have noise, which is raising, and you see false echo and so on. So it's a question mark. It has nothing to do with jamming. Not at all. Okay, we can continue.
Should we move to the next talk, Luke?
Yes.
Okay. Monsieur Mestchersky, geochemist. We'll discuss samples analysis. Is he with us? Yes.
Hello, everyone.
Jeff.
Yes, I am.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. I'm Geoffrey from the Sigma 2 Commission at EEEF, and my presentation today will be the samples from UAP events. So we are all here today attending this webinar for the same reason. We want to understand the UAP phenomena, and we want to characterize what we see in the sky or under the sea. Nevertheless, when we talk about this topic outside our community, we've all endured sneers. At some points, we were not taken seriously. We've all heard these types of questions, like where are evidences, where are your data, have you recovered any materials, or even show me your source of them. But finally, these questions are quite rightful. And sum up that, one question came up. It's, are there really true materials to study from a new event? So to answer this question, I'm going to rely on these documents, which is physical traces associated with UFO sighting. It has been published in July 1975, so it's quite old, written by Ted Phillips. It's a good document to start with when we want to study physical traces. But before talking about samples, we must define physical traces in an UAP event context. So from this document, I took this definition. Physical traces can be defined as those UAP cases in which definite physical changes in the immediate vicinity of an UAP sighting have been recorded. Marks and surface changes on the ground, damage to vegetation, residues, and artifacts found, and surface effects of some duration on buildings and vehicles. From physical traces, pieces of the area might have a scientific interest. It becomes a sample. So in this catalog, we have more than 800 cases. Among them, we have 561 cases with UAP witnesses. We have 154 cases but with no witness, and we have 116 cases with not enough details available. So let's be reasonable. We won't take account of the 116 cases because there's not enough data. We won't keep the 150 cases because there's no witness. And we're gonna work with the 561 cases. But let's be reasonable a second time. We keep only the half of it, the half of the 561 cases, because probably among them there are natural phenomena, misunderstood at that time, misinterpreted testimonies, hoaxes, etc. So it means that from the Second World War to 1975, in 30 years, makes 280 cases. So what about from 1975 to 2024, in almost 50 years, if we keep the rate of the UFO sighting per year with physical traces, it should make almost 600 cases. But let's be reasonable a third time. Let's say we have the rate is decreasing and we have maybe 200 cases. Okay, what does it do? What's the total? So since the Second World War, it makes, and that's the order of magnitude that we have to keep in mind, it makes several hundreds of cases with physical traces of an UAP event worldwide. That's the order of magnitude. So it's a lot. There are a lot of places outside waiting for us to be studied. So that's why we have to keep working on this phenomenon, on this subject, to give credibility. We have to keep working in a scientific way, as we all do here, to make the witnesses talk, to make them come to us, to say, hey guys, look what I have in my field. And like this, we can gather more and more samples to study. So in these catalogs, we can find very interesting graphs, such as the one you have in front of you. On the one on the left, we have all type of physical traces rank. So we have, for example, tree damage, footprints, stain, fluid, angel hair, odor, fragments, damage to automobile, radioactivity. All these type of physical traces might become samples. The most common are tree damage, almost 50. And of course, the most attracting are fragments, because that they are directly from the object of the phenomenon. What about the site condition? Half of them are burnt. So that's great. It means there's been an interaction between the object and the environment. So burnt soils or burnt plants or burnt woods, plenty of things to study. Then 38% of the site are depressed, meaning by following a methodology, a known methodology to manage to, to have information about the soil's characteristics, the soil mechanics, we can easily after determine the weight of the object which land in there. Then we have 11% of the site which are dehydrated. The famous case in France about that was the Aix-en-Provence in 1981, where plants were found completely dehydrated, and a scientist called Bunias collected them and studied them. His conclusion was microwave radiation impacted the plants and the chlorophyll was destroyed. So about the fragments, the most, as I was saying, the most attracting samples, because they are directly from the object. In the catalog, we have the famous case, Ubatuba in Brazil, 1957, where a disc exploded in front of witnesses and it fell in many pieces into the water and onto the beach. And those fragments were picked up. This is my second part of the presentation, the Ubatuba analysis. So this is the Ubatuba sample. It has been recovered by Jacques Vallée, maybe other did. And Jacques sent it in different labs in the US to try to characterize his chemical composition. I know that Robert Powell with the SCU did it as well, and they managed to have the same conclusion, which is but the chemical composition, it's 99.8% pure magnesium with traces of strontium, barium, zinc, and copper. Also, the isotopic ratio of magnesium differ from this on Earth. So Jacques came to us and to Sigma 2, and he provided us two samples from the Ubatuba, and he wanted us to perform analysis to make a comparison about his results and ours. So it's what we did, and I'm going now to present you our results. So we use a scanning electron microscope to study those samples. So you have a piece of the sample A and a piece of the sample B. It's, as you can see on the scale, it's 200 micrometers for the one on the left and 500 micrometers on the one on the right. At this case, as you can see, there's no organized structure of the sample on both of them. And we zoomed in on the red circle to perform chemical analysis on different points here. For sample A with a scanning electron microscope, here's a new image. The scale here is 250 micron. We perform 6 analyses at the right crosses. Spectrum 1 represents the chemical analysis of the surface, and it is the main matrix of the sample. We use the X-ray spectroscopy, and here's the results. We detect 3 elements: silicon, oxygen, and carbon, and it's quite pure silicon, more than 80% of mass. Spectrum 2, silicon, carbon, and oxygen are the main compounds, and here it represents 90%. These three represents 90% of the spectrum, and we have a lot of traces. Spectrum 3 is the same than spectrum 2. Spectrum 4 at in the white crystal. Oxygen, carbon, and silicon are still the main compounds, which represent here also 90%. And we have a little bit of iron. Spectrum 5. Iron is the main compounds, following by silicon and aluminium. On spectrum 6 in the corner, silicon and carbon are the main one. But it makes a lot of number. So to sum up that, I made a table which represents the percentage of silicon, carbon, oxygen, and iron, the main elements here found here. And as you can see, according to the place, silicon goes from 7 to 80%, carbon from 11 to 52, oxygen from none to 30%, and iron from none to 36%. So, as you saw, the sample was supposed to be 99.8% pure magnesium, and we found no magnesium at all. So that's very strange at this time. And also, as you can see, is really inhomogeneous. Then we went on another side where we found crystals, and we performed the same analysis, and we found it was sulfur oxide or potassium oxide with sulfur, potassium, oxygen to be the main compounds. And again, absolutely no magnesium. What about the sample B? So here's an image of sample B in a scanning electron microscope. So, and we use the same techniques to investigate the red zone here. We took this one because we can clearly see a white seam on it. And so we perform X-ray spectroscopy as well. Unlike the sample A, this one is clearly homogeneous for the main matrix. And we see this white seam with seems to be crystals in it. So we perform two analyses, spectrum 9 and spectrum 10. Spectrum 9, we detect, like for the previous sample, also three elements, silicon, carbon, and oxygen. Silicon is a little bit more pure than sample 1. It's 91% in mass. 7% for carbon and only 1% for oxygen. In the white seam, the analysis gives us with still silicon as the main compound. We have aluminium and iron in it, and a few carbon 7%, calcium and manganese, sorry, 1%. And again, here on sample B, there's no magnesium at all. So at this point, we couldn't conclude. Why? Because with this technique, the X-ray spectroscopy, first, we only have access to information of the surface of the sample, the chemical composition of the surface. Then the spectrum gives us information on very tiny dots, and we don't know if they do represent the entire sample. That's the first thing. And as you can imagine, it's really time consuming to do that and to do 100 of this type of analysis. Second thing is with the X-ray spectroscopy, we can't go in depth. We don't have access to the chemical composition inside the sample. Okay, and it could be different from the surface. So to answer this question, we use another technique to do that. It's called the X-ray diffraction. So with this technique, we could use it only on sample B because we didn't have enough matter with sample A. So how we use it? For sample B with these techniques, we have a global view of the entire sample. Okay, global chemical view. I mean, for that, we had to crush it into fine powder, and the entire powder is analyzed. And this way, we have access to the matter inside the sample at a global scale. Okay, so we did that only for sample B, and this is the kind of spectrum we get when we do that. When we get this spectrum, we use a database, and the result was pure silicon. Absolutely no magnesium or almost no other things. And the narrow peak mean that it's silicon very well crystallized. So, as you saw, we used two different techniques which gave us same results for at least sample B. It's very pure silicon, very well crystallized, and there we saw absolutely no magnesium at all with the two different techniques. So to conclude, as you saw, there are several hundreds of cases of physical traces of an UAP waiting for us outside. So it means there are kilograms and kilograms of sample waiting to be analyzed and investigated. When we found fragments, finally, it's very difficult to characterize. And we have a good example with the Ubatuba case. On one hand, we have magnesium. On the other hand, we have silicon. And as Gary Noland used to say, it's completely inhomogeneous or incompletely mixed. And so no conclusion can be drawn for Ubatuba sample for the moment. Thank you. And if you have any questions, I'll be pleased to answer them.
Geoffrey is connected.
Oh,
So if there are questions.
Yes, Geoffrey, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you well.
Thank you very much for your work. Quite an impressive study. I have some dumb questions to ask first. How did you choose the book you presented at first? How do you define it as a good reference?
Good question. First of all, the catalog, because the writer presented as a catalog contained more than 800 cases, and it has been the work has been done with Alan Hynek at that time. He gave in the documents he gave his thought about the work, and so I thought it was a good document to work with for the physical traces, and it's very worldwide catalog. We don't have only access to the US cases. There are a lot of cases in Europe as well, and so that's why I took it as a reference.
Okay, so then you explained that you decided that 50% of the corpus of cases could be wrong. I think the argument is that it's a conservative approach. It's even if 50% are wrong, it's still a high number of true cases.
Exactly.
Okay. In the different types of traces you show in a very interesting diagram, by the way, how do you define angel air?
Angel air are the
type of fragment, very thin fragments, which seems to be like a spider nets, you know, or hair, as it said. And type of fragments are very difficult to recover because when we do, it seems to sublime itself, you know, so it becomes vapor. It's very difficult to recover.
But it was quite a high rate of cases that had angel hair that were noticed inside, if I understood correctly, the diagram.
Yes, but very often witnesses said that there were angel hair, but the witnesses didn't collect them. They were saying that to Ted Phillips or Alan Hynek.
Okay, thank you. In another type of traces, you talk about radioactivity. Was the soil contaminated?
I don't have exactly the details, but very often that's the soil. There's a difference between fragments and soil here, but most of the time it was, yes, the soil or plants, but not fragments which show radioactivity.
Okay, because in Paul Hill's work, Unconventional Flying Objects, he noted that he found traces of radioactivity, but nothing above hard X-rays. So the soil wasn't radioactive with gamma radiations, but there were traces of hard radiation applied to the soil. Did you find something similar in your cases?
I don't have enough details, but in radioactivity, you have several kinds of radiation, you know, and it's not because you don't have gamma or radioactivity, it doesn't mean you don't have radioactivity, because it does exist alpha and beta ray, you know, radiation. And sometimes when you go on the field, and the easiest way to measure radioactivity is with gamma probe, you know. But if the radioactivity is only composed of alpha and beta radioactivity, you won't measure it on the field, but the radioactivity is still there. And also, we have to keep in mind that around us there are radioactivity everywhere. It's called natural radioactivity, you know. So we don't have to. We don't. It's important not to. We have to keep in mind that it's two different things. Okay.
Absolutely. Then in the sample you made a study of. So it may be a very dumb question, but what I saw were composition of atoms. Do we know if they were in molecules, or we just have a ratio of atomic particles of the sample?
It shows the chemical composition, so it's only about elements. So atoms, it's not molecules here. And yes, the height of the peaks shows the ratio, but it's not isotopic here. It's not. It's just elements. I cannot use techniques. I cannot make the difference between isotopic silicon among them. It's just total silicon, total iron, or total aluminium, for example.
Yes, but in nature, most atoms are combined inside molecules. Do we have a way of knowing what type of molecules the atoms were combined into in the samples?
Yes, but most of the time we talk about molecules with for life, you know, for woods, plants, or sometimes for soils. But for this type of artifacts, it's not molecules. We talk about atoms, because the matter is arranged. When the atoms are arranged, it doesn't. Here we cannot talk about molecules. It's really atoms.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hey, Mike, do you have any question on your side?
I mean, it's just remarkable that you couldn't detect any magnesium. I mean, right? I mean, it's not just like there's a little bit of magnesium, but you're saying there was zero. Like, I mean, it's just stunning. I mean, what was your reaction to that result? I mean, you're sure that this is the same sample, right? I mean, there's a question, right? I mean, because multiple studies have shown there was elemental magnesium of this kind of purity, and yet your analysis is zero. I mean, this is a direct contradiction.
Yes. After when I got my result, I was like you. I couldn't understand why I didn't find magnesium. My hypothesis at that time was the original sample is so inhomogeneous that when Jacques Vallée recovered few pieces for us, he took apart that there were no magnesium. That's my only hypothesis, because I cannot imagine that all the magnesium change into silicon. For me, it doesn't make sense, So that's and Gary Nolan in his presentation said a lot of times, he said that it's incompletely mixed. Like, it's so when he studied his samples, he said that it's completely heterogeneous, So I think that's the same for Utuba sample.
I see. So the point is that the total sample is inhomogeneous, such that the samples that were analyzed were magnesium, but other fragments, other parts of what are alleged to be the same sample are in fact, because of the inhomogeneity, are not going to register as magnesium. So it would be wrong to think of the whole sample as having been completely pure, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, that has to be the case, right? I mean, because magnesium just doesn't change into silicon without some kind of irradiation or something, I assume, to transmute it, right? I mean,
yes. The only mechanism we know on Earth which could change an element into another is radioactivity, but
right.
It's not those elements are not radioactive, so it's not
Right.
useful for that.
Right. Very bizarre.
Yes.
Thank you, Geoffrey. Do we, if there are no other questions, then perhaps we can proceed to the third, or Luc, if you have a question.
I just would like to make a remark about this analysis. We found, as it was clearly explained, so different components, and not magnesium but silicon. However, there is something similar between the two types of samples. It's the degree, and if I'm wrong, please, Geoffrey, you can correct me. But there is something similar, which is the degree of purity. Okay. In the case of magnesium, I think it was one of the characteristics that was given through the former analysis that were conducted. In our case, it's not, if I'm right, it's not oxide of silicon. It's silicon pure, which is not natural state of this metal. So that's something which is somewhere surprising.
Yes, you're right, Luc. If we consider silicon in our case, we're not as pure as the magnesium Jacques and Gary Nolan found, because he said that it's 99% pure, magnesium. Here we don't have this this purity for the silicon because we seems to be around 90. Well, it's still good, but we're not. We do not reach 99% of silicon. We are around 90. But yes, you're right. It seems to be non-oxide silicon.
Thank you. Okay. So shall we continue?
Proceed? Yeah.
I think that given the time which is running, I think that we skip the break and we continue directly on the next presentation.
Okay. So Mr. Larry Hancock and Ian Porrit.
Thank you for the opportunity to present our study to you today. My name is Ian, and I'll be covering the work our team has done over the last several years on understanding the patterns and the intentions behind the UAP phenomena in the US during the 1940s to the 1970s. The breadth of the UAP phenomena is daunting, and the question around intentions is even more so. Our team has been applying the practices of pattern recognition and indications analysis to the questions of UAP intelligence and their intentions. Those practices have been incorporated into a model which presents a structured methodology for the study and assessment of UAP intent in a variety of domains. This presentation will provide an overview of the intention study model and its applications to the US military and public activities. Each group of our studies are broken down into these two separate parts. The first part is a pattern recognition study, where we collect the incidents and analyze the activities, which is the bottom of the pyramid. The second study, the indications analysis, builds on the first paper. We define the intention scenarios, map each indicator to each scenario to come up with our best estimate of the likely intention of the UAP. To summarize the studies, there are 2 focus areas and 4 studies in our series. All 4 studies focus on the United States and during the period between 1945 to 1975. The first focus area is the US military complex, and the first paper found an intelligent, focused activity around the US atomic warfare complex. The second paper, the indications analysis, found that this pattern was most likely to be an advanced military capability survey of the atomic warfare complex. The second focus area is around specific UAP activities in both the public and military domains. The third paper found a transition of UAP behaviors where their activity shifted from highly visible, daylight, and at a distance incidents to public close approaches and at night. And the fourth paper is still a work in progress. For all the studies, we have established a collections framework. What sources will be used, what data we need to collect, and what criteria will be used to select appropriate incidents. In terms of the sources used, the main sources were the Sparks and the NICAP catalogs. We then go through each source and build a separate study database in which the analysis will be based. A reconciliation process is then done to ensure each incident meets the collection framework. A number of incidents are reported in both data sources, so to ensure there was no duplication incidents used in our study, we also reconcile each incident against both sources to ensure we don't double count any incident. When each study is published, we also include a database of the incidents we have used, which links back to the source. For the 4 studies, there is a common set of incidents, and over the 4 studies, we've used over 1,000 incidents. Each study has its own defined selection requirement, and only incidents that meet their requirement are included in the study. Individual incidents can be included in both focus areas if they meet the study criteria. Now we'll look at Study 1 in a bit more detail. Study 1 was a UAP pattern recognition study, 1945 to 1975, for the US military atomic warfare complex and was published in April 2023. When we compare the reports at the atomic warfare sites against the reports at the standard military sites, we can see that there is a significant higher interest in the atomic sites, and that this interest by the UAP was during the key periods of development. The period 1947 to 1951, which was the establishment of the radioactive material production plants at Hanford and at Oak Ridge, and the two atomic weapons assembly sites at Los Alamos and Sandia, the storage of weapons at the SAC bases, and the testing of missiles at White Sands. This was a key point in time in the development of the atomic warfare complex, and these key sites during these key times were the sites targeted by UAP. The period 1965 to 1967 at the newly established Minuteman II ICBM sites was another key point in time for the delivery of atomic warheads, and these ICBM sites received focused activity by the UAP. 1975 saw another focused cluster of activity by UAP at their newly established Minuteman III ICBM sites. So we have a significant elevated interest at the atomic warfare sites, and this elevated interest occurred at strategic times during the atomic warfare development. During 1952 and 1957, we see a wider US peak of UAP activity, and during these peaks, we see a much wider interest across a larger number of both standard and atomic military sites. As mentioned, a few key sites during the key phases of the facility establishment reported the majority of UAP reports for the military. The top chart shows a cluster of activity at the radioactive materials production plants of Hanford and Oak Ridge, and the two atomic weapons assembly sites of Los Alamos and Sandia, and the SAC base of Killeen. The middle chart shows a cluster of activity at the missile site of White Sands, and the two clusters of activity at the ICBM sites. This is a targeted pattern of activity and therefore intelligently focused and focused on the US atomic warfare complex. Note, in 1952, when there was a wave of UAP activity across the US for both the public and the military, a wide range of standard military sites did report UAPs. They were capable of observing and reporting UAPs during this wave, but the lack of reporting from standard military sites prior to this suggests that they were not the focus in the prior years. When we plot out the locations of the individual military sites, we can see the military facility types were spread across the US. The UAP incidents were not geographically focused. It wasn't targeted at a specific area. It was targeted at military facility types and at their critical moments in history. This was not a geographically focused survey. It was a facility type survey. Study 2 was a UAP intentions analysis for the US atomic military warfare complex and was published in August 2023. From the pattern study, we established 31 indicators covering these 20 areas, which we used to map to the various scenarios. For Study 2, we also included several other non-site-specific reports relating to the military in order to understand the wider military context, such as bomber alert missions and air defense exercises. We also looked at non-military reports around nuclear power plants. We then took our 4 scenarios, which are a general military survey, an atomic weapons survey, atomic warfare prevention, and the last one, military aggression by the UAP. We then created a matrix of indicators and scenarios. Each of the 31 indicators is assessed for its data quality. Are we able to make an informed decision based on the data? We then determine if the data supports the indicator pattern. We then take each indicator and assess how much that indicator supports each of the 4 scenarios. This matrix forms the basis for the decision within the group and is used in combination with the individual detailed reports and the pattern analysis to inform the estimate of the situation. Based on our assessment, we then rank each scenario from the most likely to the least likely, with the atomic weapons survey ranking first, followed by a military survey, an atomic warfare prevention, and lastly, military aggression. Study 3 was published in March 2024 and is the activities pattern study of the US military and public UAP reports. For Study 3, we focus on 9 UAP activities. These activities suggest forms of display, interaction, or contact. They were interactive flight, so UAPs flying in formational groups; radical flight, displaying technologies in advance of current technology; loitering, being able to be observed for long periods of time; electronic transmissions; interference with weapon systems or intrusions; close approaches and occupants being observed or encountered. So previously we focused on the location of incidents. Here we focus on the type of incident. These 9 activities were then plotted out to see the trend over time. From the pattern analysis, we are seeing a number of patterns emerge. Starting at the top of the chart, interactive flight, radical flight, and loitering are relatively high to begin with and decreased to very low levels by 1975. Electronic transmissions, predominantly IFF, which is a coded transmission being received from the UAP, is clustered in the middle, and interference with weapon systems and intrusions are small in overall numbers, but their occurrence aligns with key atomic warfare patterns identified in Study 1. At the bottom of the chart, close approaches to the public, occupants observed, increased to relatively high levels in the 2 peaks in the 1960s and 70s. We also classify the incidents used in the study as relating to the military or the public, and if the incident occurred during the day or the night. There are 2 noticeable patterns here. 1, an increase of public incidents started early 1960s, and for both the military and public, a move from more daytime incidents to predominantly nighttime incidents. We then put this all together to show the transition over time. There are 3 broad phases over the study period. 1945 to 1954, which is defined by daytime incidents involving interactive flight and radical flight. These are highly visible displays of advanced technology. 1955 to 1964, we start to see a transition away from display type activity, more nighttime activity involving close approaches and a cluster of IFF transmissions. Lastly, from 1965 to 1975, we see predominantly nighttime activity directed towards the public and close approaches. While running through the whole study period is military interference and intrusions occurring at key strategic times of the development and deployment of atomic weapons. Even though we are looking at activities rather than locations of report, we also plotted out the locations and the date of the reports within the US. Interestingly, with the increase in nighttime public approaches, we see a cluster of incidents during 1970 to 1974 in what is described as the US Rust Belt, the industrial area of the US. With the following year, 1975, where there is an increase in activity at the northern atomic military sites, the public encounters drop off around this location. Following on from Study 3, we are currently working on Study 4, which is covering the possible UAP intentions related to the patterns of activity found in Paper 3. This study will hopefully get published towards the end of the year. Similar to what we did with the intention study for the military facilities, we will take a number of possible intention scenarios involving various stages of contact protocols, human behavioral studies, exploitation or assistance, and apply the activity indicators to understand which of these scenarios is the most likely. We are still working through this final stage and will hopefully have this paper out this year. This is the end of the presentation, so thank you again for the opportunity to present our work to you.
Thank you, Ian. Should we go to questions, Luke?
Test. Yeah. Yeah. I have a question regarding the slide UAP activities as intention indicators. It's just to understand the logic. So, for example, in extended surveillance at all first generation atomic weapons design, you rated as red in military aggression. What is the logic behind the assessment of red for military aggression?
Could you just repeat which line that was?
So it's the third line of the slide, extended surveillance, and you rated it as red in military aggression. And as a newcomer on the field, if I'm thinking of being aggressive toward another nation, I would have extended surveillance at first generation atomic weapons. So how did you define that military aggression didn't fit extended surveillance at all first generation atomic weapons design?
Yeah, so we're looking at whether the UAP were doing a survey of our technological development of our atomic warfare complex, as well as looking at whether they're trying to stop us from using them against either themselves or against ourselves, or military aggression. And the type of incidents that were being involved at those sites didn't suggest aggression towards those sites. They were not necessarily interfering with the sites. They weren't trying to stop us from doing anything. It was more related to observing rather than prevention.
Because in military strategy, and maybe Luke, you can give your input on it. If I would like to invade another country, I would make sure that that country isn't aware of my will of invading it. So I would do operations at the contrary to reinforce the idea that I'm a friend of that country, so it doesn't have prepared defenses against me.
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of strategies involved when you want to invade another country or when you have military aggression. So that is always going to be a possibility. But the nature of the events suggested more that it was more of a survey rather than military aggression, and we don't see a follow-on aggression after the study period either.
Could I ask a couple of questions? Is it all right if
Yeah,
I
of
jump in?
course. You are the chairman, so you can ask whatever you like.
Put my hand down. Ian, thank you very much. And I don't know if it's Larry with us or not, but I'll just address
No,
you.
Larry couldn't make it tonight. So.
Okay. I have a lot of questions. I mean, they're sort of following from Baptiste, who was, I think, interrogating some of the logic here. I mean, I guess what it sort of seems like the question is, what is an inference and what is an assumption, right? I mean, are you trying to deduce or infer an intention, or are you assuming that there is an intention and you're trying to find that pattern in UAP activity? I mean, that there seems to be a bit of an ambiguity here, which way the logic works. I mean, are you're coming into the study presupposing that there's a kind of an intelligent activity behind a certain class of UAP incidents, and then you're trying to deduce from that a kind of structure of intention. Is that correct? Or is it the opposite? Are you trying to deduce the intentionality, or are you coming into the study with that assumption that there's an intelligence there? And then you're looking for what the intention behind the intelligence is.
So that's why we sort of break down the studies into two parts. So we have the pattern analysis section first, where we take a set of data and we look for patterns to see what's happening. And the patterns from study one suggested that there was an intelligent focused on the atomic warfare complex, because the majority of the incidents that were particularly occurring in the mid to late 40s were targeted at 4 or 5 atomic warfare sites. So that was our analysis coming out of study one, is that it was an intelligent focused. And so study two then says, okay, we've found a focused on the atomic warfare complex. What could that mean? In study two, the intentions analysis is very subjective, and we understand that. You can't put a lot of hard numbers around it. The matrix that we use is primarily used as a discussion document between the team. We go through it line by line, discussing what we think it means. And then we will go to the detailed incidents involved in that indicator to get a better understanding of what's happening, not just basing it straight off that. So the first thing is, yes, we understand the patterns from that. We deduce that it's a focused activity, and then we try and understand what that focused activity could mean in terms of the scenarios that we present.
And so one question is just, and of course this is likely all in the paper. So I mean, these questions are perhaps superficial, but in order to infer intentionality and intelligence, one has to be careful about what UAP incidents count, right? I mean, there's lots of things that people see in the sky that are unidentified, right? So I assume first you have to sort of segregate out, cases that wouldn't count, yeah. and then you'd isolate that down to a subset of cases that you consider to be sort of authentic UAP incidents, and that set is the set you work with in order to discuss things like patterns and intentionality. And so, in other words, you have to clean your data first before, So that's an initial stage of analysis, right?
Yes. So what we did there is we focused on the period 1945 to 1975, because of the data sets that we could use for that. And so we used the Sparks list primarily, which is a subset of the Blue Book cases. So Spark has obviously gone through the Blue Book cases and identified all of the unidentified reports in there. So we're working with a subset of the Blue Book that's been independently done from us. And so that's our basis of our data set. We then go through each individual incident to determine whether it related to the facility or not.
And how do you determine whether it's related to the facility or not? I mean, presumably you're comparing that to some reference class. And in other words, when you say there's a spike, for example, well, relative to what reference class, right? I mean, some random town in Idaho or something, there's like a background rate, and then relative to that background rate, you note a spike. So what's the reference class and how is that established?
So the first part of paper 1 study is we selected a number of military facilities that had as close as possible the similar sort of infrastructure and radar installations and that sort of thing that would give us a site that should report a similar sort of level of activity if there was a similar sort of level of activity. So most of those atomic warfare sites, we chose 2 or 3 military facilities that were similar. We did include some population centers just as a reference, but the primary comparison was the military sites. And so there was elevated activity when compared against any one of those control sites. In fact, there was elevated activity when you compared it against the total of all of the control sites. So that was the first part of the study. The second part of the study is that we then took all of the military non-atomic sites reports and compared them to the small handful of atomic warfare sites, which you probably shouldn't do in terms of a fair comparison. The standard military sites, because of their number, should significantly outweigh the atomic warfare sites. But we found the opposite. Even comparing the atomic warfare sites against all of the military sites, there was still a significant amount of activity.
And just my last question, and this might just be what you sort of said about, the study, I think it was the third study being a bit more subjective. So, I mean, I understand, if a UAP is emitting an IFF signal, that's interesting, right? I mean, that's remarkable, right? I mean, I was just reading in Robert Powell's new book, for example, those cases in which an IFF signal, specific frequencies, right, were detected from certain UAP, and there are numerous cases. I didn't realize how many there were. That's interesting. That to me is a direct, that sort of directly implies intelligence or some kind of intentionality or some kind of interactivity, right? That suggests intelligence, but other things that you call intention indicators, I'm less certain of, and I just wanted to hear your reasoning about that, like loitering, and for example, I mean, what constitutes loitering, number one, and why would that indicate an intention? A close approach and radical flight, I'm not sure how those constitute or imply intention or intentionality.
Okay,
so some of them I can see, some of them I can't quite see. Yeah.
If you're looking at a contact protocol, so typically if you're going to contact another civilization, you don't turn up in numbers and approach it very quickly and try and engage them. You might not know the language or the culture. You've got a significant chance of doing damage to the relationship by not understanding their reaction and scaring them off and creating problems for the first time. So what you want to do is initially you want to make your presence known to them. You will stand off, you won't approach, you'll keep any sort of language or body language or interaction to an absolute minimum. And so you'll go through a number of steps from making yourself aware right the way through to your first contact. So what we're seeing in the very initial stages is that they are appearing during the day, which is more overt than clandestine. They are standing off. They are displaying that they are advanced by the fact that they're displaying radical technology. Flying in formation is also a sign of intelligence. And so these, and loitering, staying around so that we can see them, identify and understand that they are advanced. These are all things that you could do in the early stages of a contact protocol. But that's what we are sort of saying by they're an indicator of what you would expect if you were in those early stages. What we then see is that the daytime incidents are replaced by nighttime incidents. So that's going against what you would expect for a contact protocol. And then they go more clandestine than overt, which again is going against the progression of a contact protocol. So one scenario could be that they wanted to establish contact. Because of our reaction or lack of reaction, they decided against that and changed their focus to something else.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's all. Those are all the questions. I mean, I want to talk to you a long time about the whole study or all of the studies, but thank you. Should we? Are there any other questions?
I just have a remark following your
Yeah.
discussion. Same thing as Dr. Cifone, I found the slide on transition of activities over time very interesting. It's a really good idea to put that together. When I checked the sources you used to create that data, you use the Sparks and NICAP reports, if I'm correct?
Correct, yeah.
And there is something puzzling to me about these records because we know that there were classified programs using the Office of Special Investigation in the Air Force to remove from the Blue Book files the cases that were really disturbing for national security. And when I see the drop of electronic transmissions between 64 and 65, 69, I'm thinking, may that be the case that it was at that time deemed too risky for national security to show that electronic transmission were recorded, and reports with notes of electronic transmission recorded were removed from the files. So that just notes I had when you were both talking. So maybe if you have an input on that.
Yeah, it's hard to deal with the information that you don't know about.
Yeah,
I can't say whether they were removed or whether they were suppressed. Where we can, we look at what's happening to see whether that is happening or that's not happening. So for one of the military facilities where it dropped off quite significantly, we also looked at the surrounding public incidences to see whether they also dropped off, to see whether the military was just on the base suppressing UAP reports. And we saw a similar drop-off between the military and the public, suggesting that activity at that particular facility did drop off. When we looked at the nuclear power plants, so non-military nuclear power plants, we didn't see any sort of cluster of activity around those nuclear power plants. But then we would expect to see at least some reports coming out of those facilities. And since we didn't see any, it could be that they were prevented from reporting UAP. So we couldn't rely on the fact that we didn't see anything. So sometimes we can rely on no reports as being an indicator, and sometimes no information means we just don't have any information. So,
thank you very much. Thank you.
I think one of the important things with this type of analysis is to understand that any UAP intent is going to change over time. They're not going to be doing the same thing every year, year in, year out. And so if you look at a long study period and average those things out rather than looking at them by individual years or months or days, you're going to miss these unique windows of activity where they focus in on a particular thing. Once they've got the answers to those questions that they need, then they focus on another area. And that's what we're seeing in our studies, is these focused activities or windows of activity.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's very interesting.
Okay, I guess if there are no other questions, in the interest of time, we should probably move to the, thank you, Ian, again. We should move to the final talk of the session number 3 here, which is by my distinguished colleague, Miss Ann Taylor, or Tyler, rather, an affiliate of the Society for the UAP Studies. Ann, if we can put her, I assume these are recorded talks, right? We can run hers. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Ann Tyler, and I'm here presenting Harnessing the Power of Pilot Testimonies and Pilots and UAP Research and EPIC project. Thanks for the organizers of this event and to the Society of UAP Studies for the opportunity to contribute to this webinar that brings together the efforts of multidisciplinary experts from several countries who are dedicated to investigating UAPs, which is arguably one of the most crucial and confounding challenges of our time. Ryan Graves last year in his congressional testimony stated, "Stigma silence pilots who fear professional repercussions, which is compounded by recent government claims questioning the credibility of eyewitness testimony. Unidentified objects in our airspace present an urgent and critical safety and national security issue, but pilots are not getting the support they need and the respect they deserve. When I served, my squadron was encountering UAPs nearly every day and nothing was being done." I would like to introduce myself and the other members of the teams for 2 projects that I will describe today: the Pilots and UAP Research Project and the EPIC program. My name's Ann Tyler. I'm from Minnesota in the United States, and I'm a co-PI for the Pilots and UAP Research Project and co-leader for the EPIC program. I'm a licensed psychotherapist in the United States. I specialize in the neuroscience of stress, executive function, and performance enhancement for individuals in high-demand careers. I have decades of experience as a clinician, trainer, and researcher, including as a research director for the project of the Iowa Supreme Court. I'm a veteran of the United States Air Force who was stationed at the 132nd Tactical Fighter Wing, and where I first gained my deep appreciation for the expertise and sacrifice of pilots. And I have other family members who've served in the Air Force and work in the aerospace industry. On a personal note, I have witnessed these strange objects in the sky and the flight dynamics described by pilots, and I've seen very strange objects that honestly hit my boggle threshold, but at least my feet were on the ground. I'm also the founder of the Exceptional Experiencer Empowerment Initiative, which is a collaboration of experts from academia, research, and clinical practice who provide ethical guidelines and research-based training to mental health professionals serving clients who report anomalous experiences. I'm an affiliate member of the Society for UAP Studies, the Scientific and Medical Network, among other organizations supporting UAP research. I'm here as an independent researcher interested in the effects of stigma, the lived experiences of pilots after UAP events, and what can be done to support increased awareness, community, and resilience. Ia Whiteley is a consultant on the Pilots and UAP Research Project and is co-leader with me on the EPIC program. Ia is an aviation and space psychologist and cognitive engineer who specializes in the enhancement of human performance through technology and training for people who work in extreme and safety critical environments, and has provided training for pilots, astronauts, and surgeons. She's a member of the Unidentified Anomalous Phenomenon Integration and Outreach Committee, which seeks to improve aviation safety by enhancing scientific knowledge of and mitigating barriers to the study of unidentified anomalous phenomena, which is housed under the American Institute for Aeronautics and Astronautics. She serves on the leadership team of the E3 initiative and is participating in these two projects as an independent researcher interested in perceptual and sensory awareness and performance enhancement for pilots who have encountered UAPs. Two other members of the team serve as co-PIs on the Pilots and UAP Research Project. Kimberly Ingalls is an associate professor of philosophy at Malloy University. She's an advisory board member at the Society for UAP Studies and is director of research and development at the John E. Mack Institute. She has studied Husserlian and Sartrean phenomenology at Marquette University and is the past president of the North American Satir Society. Her UAP research interests lie in the lived conscious experiences of individuals who report UAP encounters and how we can use phenomenology as a tool in examining these experiences. David Mitchell is an assistant professor of integral transpersonal psychology at the California Institute for Integral Studies. He's co-founder of the Exceptional Experiences Research Lab at the University of West Georgia, and he is on the E3 Initiative leadership team and a member of the Society for Scientific Exploration. His scholarly interests are in cultural and transpersonal significance of entity encounters and deep memory. Together, we bring expertise from social and psychological research, neuroscience, philosophy, performance enhancement, and training in aviation safety to these projects. As we're all aware, there are problems that have been identified by pilots and those who are brave enough to even mention the UAP issue. If you're attending this conference, you're well aware of the significant resistance from governments and society in general in acknowledging UAPs, which poses a lot of challenges, particularly in the aviation sector. This has numerous adverse consequences. First and foremost, the human impact. The lack of official recognition has stymied the development of formal reporting and safety protocols, leaving pilots to navigate these encounters without support. Societal stigma and bias within the aviation community further exacerbate the issues, with pilots facing potential ridicule and career risks. The environment discourages reporting. As a matter of fact, Ryan Graves estimates that only about 5% of UAP sightings by pilots are actually reported. And as we're talking about this issue of stigma, when we hear that word repeatedly in interviews with some of the comments that are being said, if you look deeper at what is under the definition of stigma, Dolezal from 2022, that's referenced in a white paper by Unhidden, describes stigma. It's a socialized concept of what is disgraceful, unacceptable, and abnormal within a particular social group. And being marked as stigmatized does not merely designate someone as different, but denotes them as discredited, denigrated, devalued, and disgraced. And the social ostracism that comes from stigma leads to social and psychological isolation. And as we all know, there is stigma in relation to sightings of UAPs, of talking about them, investigating them, And this feeling of being devalued when trying to report has been mentioned by witnesses from all walks of life, pilots and scientists who are trying to study UAPs and do research. Except for brief comments and interviews by pilots about their experience of stigma, which they're starting to speak about more often, there's almost a complete lack of attention on the lived experience of pilots after UAP events. We're still very focused on the important tasks of getting the awareness out and implementing policies to protect witnesses and getting safety protocols in place. But a lot of pilots have also talked about the fact that even if they do report to those who will listen, that what's next? There isn't anything else being done yet. And addressing these challenges requires a concerted effort to reduce stigma overall and promote more open dialogue, so it encourages more pilots to share their experiences. Because if we value and listen to their testimonies, it can enhance scientific understandings of their experiences, improve aviation safety, and ensure that pilots are respected as key observers in our skies. There's a lot of references on this slide, and most of them are from the US. But if you think about all the recent interviews and publications that have been coming out and the growing number of organizations that are being formed to address UAP-related issues, whether it's scientific, research, policy, or safety-related, what becomes clear quickly is that the pilots' testimonies have served a central role in raising awareness and validating the existence of UAPs, whatever they are, for the legitimacy of being able to discuss this topic in public and leading to research and deeper inquiry. And they have led the way in raising concerns for aviation safety, which affects everyone. And these concerns are not new. There's been slow progress over the last few decades due to the secrecy, the misinformation, and stigma. But in the last few years, there seems to be an acceleration of awareness and action. And by a large part, because more pilots are speaking publicly and providing validation for many other experts and scientists and policymakers to begin to take this seriously. The aperture began to open wider when Leslie Kean published her book, UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record. But it's interesting to note that that was in 2010. And more recently, we're all aware of the 2017 article in the New York Times that really seemed to get the attention of a lot more people in validating, or at least paying some attention, that this might be something of concern. And it's encouraging to see more pilots doing public interviews and journalists interviewing them. And as represented here in this conference, there's so many more organizations who are documenting pilot testimonies, developing reporting and safety recommendations. NARCAP has been doing this since 1999 and has even issued advisories for pilots, air crews, and air controllers and aviation professionals in 2019, and has worked with Ryan Graves' organization and the committee with AIAA with recommendations to improve acquisition and management of aviation-related UAP data in 2023. And Ryan Graves has been a prominent advocate for pilots and aviation safety related to UAP events with his establishment of the Americans for Safe Aerospace, which has served in many roles to elevate this issue and bring more pilots forward. When you think about him stating that only 5% of the pilots may be reporting their events, what would happen if that was doubled to 10? Or what if it was doubled again to only 20%? Just think of the floodgates that would open if pilots had the safety and the stigma was controlled so that they could speak. All of these actions are bringing forth changes in the aerospace industry with the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics that Ryan Graves helped establish a integration and outreach committee for UAPs. And there's been recent legislation with the Safe Aerospace for Americans Act to protect civilian aviation professionals against retaliation, medical disqualification, or cease and desist notifications. And this was endorsed by the Americans for Safe Aerospace. Pilot testimonies have also informed and contributed to the scientific inquiry into UAPs. And their credibility has also transferred and rippled out into the other communities that want to take this issue seriously. Hopefully, more actions will be taken to protect our airspace and make it safer for pilots to report sightings. But there's still a long way to go. Alex Dietrich recently said in an interview that pilots might be concerned about their careers. They don't want to be the kooky UFO person. So I guess I'm trying to normalize it by talking about it. I hope I'm not the UFO tic-tac person for the rest of my life. This is not what I envisioned for myself. But she often talks about how many people reach out to her to share their UAP sightings and the concerns they have about their reputation. And Alex's response is, you know, there's a common humanity of being a little bit shocked, delighted, nervous, confused, all of that. And so recognizing that in another human can be comforting. And she speaks to the importance of really remembering and honoring the human impact that these UAP sightings have in the lives of many people. I would like to illustrate where our work lines up with the efforts already undertaken. The reports by pilots have led the way for research into the physical descriptions and physics of these objects that they have seen. This has led to advocacy for unified reporting procedures and proactive safety recommendations. And as scientists, researchers, and independent organizations are continuing their investigation, we plan to contribute to the available data with these two projects that extend the scope of the work being done right now. A couple of organizations are also extending their focus to include the human and societal impacts of UAP disclosure. Unhidden in the UK seeks to address the impacts of UAPs on the mental health and well-being of individuals who have seen things that they can't explain. Navy pilot Alex Dietrich and also Tim Gallaudet and Sean Cahill serve as ambassadors in that organization. And we want to join the people-centric approaches that are coming to the forefront right now. The Soul Foundation, which is investigating the physics and science of these objects, has also expanded their research agenda into the human and societal impact of disclosure. We plan to add to the current data with more nuanced descriptions of the personal and psychological lived experiences of pilots and the effects of stigma. In addition to this research project, we plan to take our work further by providing a direct service to pilots as an opportunity to have a confidential online community to talk about resources, education, and recommendations for what is helpful for support, especially when nothing has been developed or organized within the industry yet. And although we hope training is developed soon within aviation industries, pilots have been waiting a long time, sometimes decades, for something to be done, and actions are progressing, but it is still slow. Our service is unique because it's outside the aviation industry. Sometimes it's preferred to have an independent, confidential service as a resource that has personal well-being as the primary goal. I'll present the plan for two projects. The first one is the Pilots and UAP Research Project. We don't want to speak for pilots or provide explanations about what this phenomenon is, or make any judgments about the state of individuals who have witnessed these events. We're also not trying to prove the existence of UAPs. That's not the scope of our work. We accept the evidence of UAPs that are being observed and pilots are having real experiences. We just don't know what these are yet. We seek to provide more opportunities for the voices of pilots to be heard and to contribute to these transformative changes. We plan to conduct a systemic inquiry with pilots worldwide that adds to the subjective, firsthand experiences of pilots to expand our understanding of the nature and impact of this phenomenon. We hope our investigations will inform further interdisciplinary collaboration and rigorous research methods to capture the human experience and how best to listen, understand, and support those who have experienced UAPs. Our objective is to conduct a targeted inquiry into the nature and impact of UAP encounters, contributing to a more informed, open, and proactive response, and to support the well-being of pilots. In the research project, we plan to conduct anonymous surveys and interviews with pilots. The IRB will be through Malloy University for research ethics for human subjects to protect the anonymity of participants. The surveys for pilots will be given and offered to those who have reported and those who haven't reported their UAP events. And we plan to offer a follow-up interview for those who are willing to participate, which is also confidential and anonymous. In the phenomenological analysis of data that we plan to do, this method suspends assumptions about the source or origin of the phenomena and examines what appears to individuals in lived experience and how they made sense of it. This research method is used in the fields of sociology, anthropology, and psychology as an intellectually rigorous qualitative analysis, including for large language data sets, such as interviews and surveys. This research is not about determining what was encountered, but how it affected the everyday lives of pilots, this path of integration. And through the phenomenological method, we will aim to understand what appeared to pilots in their conscious experience of encountering a UAP and how they formed judgments about what appeared to them, how the experience resulted in changes in their values, beliefs, and worldviews, and how experiences of stigma and bias surrounding UAP has impacted their lives in the aftermath. The second project I would like to present today is called EPIC, and it stands for Empowering Pilots Through Integration and Community. Ia Whiteley and I will provide this service, which is an opportunity for pilots to meet in a group to discuss the needs that they identify after UAP events, and will provide and cultivate development of proactive education and tools for the well-being of pilots that may also extend to others in the aviation industry. The EPIC program has a few key features that I'll share today. One of them is a confidential peer platform, allowing pilots to exchange experiences and ideas, and also leveraging their collective experience to improve pilot resilience for themselves and each other. We plan to provide resources focused on understanding and managing the aftermath of UAP encounters from various research-based approaches. And we want to ensure that pilots' voices contribute to the development of these tools and strategies along the way that are designed for performance enhancement and personal well-being. We plan to offer a pre- and post-program survey that's just going to serve as feedback for continued development. And we anticipate that the outcomes of this service will enhance the professional and personal well-being for pilots, can develop tools and educational materials, and provide resources that are tailored and co-created with pilots who have experienced UAPs. Chris Van Voorhees is a commercial pilot who stated in a recent interview with Ryan Graves, "We have a lot of our pilots where I currently work that have come forward to me and say, hey, you know, I've seen this stuff out there that I can't explain, but I don't have an avenue to express what I've seen without repercussions from the airline. Let's face it, the airlines don't want to have people out there saying my pilots are out there seeing UFOs or UAPs. But I would say 40% of us who are commercial pilots or more have actually seen UAPs out there. And Chris Van Voorhees is a commercial pilot with decades of experience and over 30,000 flight hours. Our request today is that we would like to have feedback, consultation, or collaboration about our work as it's related to other initiatives and research that others may be doing. And we request assistance with announcing our projects to notify pilots who may want to participate. And further, if any independent or regional organization might have a particular interest to survey specific groups of pilots, we'd be interested in discussions about potential collaboration. And we are looking for funding opportunities for both projects. In conclusion, both of our projects uniquely contribute to harnessing the power of pilot testimonies. This approach ensures that while we advance our understanding of UAPs through methodical research, we also provide and continue to develop resources, community, and support, recognizing the personal and professional impact these encounters can have on individuals. I extend my thanks to everyone who has joined forces to enrich our understanding of UAPs and those impacted by them. Your dedication to integrating diverse perspectives and experiences is pivotal, both in advancing our scientific knowledge and honoring the human aspects of these encounters. Together, we are shifting the narrative from one of fear and stigma to one of acceptance and rigorous inquiry by those committed to researching and advocating for transformative change. These actions inspire a broader narrative of curiosity and empower a more informed and compassionate global response. Thank you, and we look forward to hearing from others who are interested in our work.
Thanks a lot for all your contributions for this session. Very different from the sessions yesterday, but very interesting as well, with a different perspective, of course, from psychology to samples analysis to electromagnetic effects on aircraft and so on. That's quite a diversity, but nuke. Yes, a nuke, you're right. Yes.